England, 1853. Rain tapped gently against the windows of Ashford Estate as Lady Vivian Campbell sat in her favourite armchair, a leather-bound book resting in her lap. At 40 years of age, with soft auburn curls now streaked with silver at her temples, she had long since accepted the label society had placed upon her. Spinster. The grand library of Ashford Estate was Vivian's sanctuary. Towering mahogany bookshelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, filled with volumes collected by generations of Campbells. The room smelled of leather bindings, beeswax polish, and the lingering scent of wood smoke from the morning fire. Through the bay window, she watched raindrops transform the eastern gardens into a glistening wonderland. Vivian traced her finger along the gilded lettering on her book's cover, a treatise on botanical specimens of the British Isles. Unlike many ladies who feigned interest in subjects merely to appear accomplished, Vivian's passion for botany was genuine. Her personal garden at the far edge of the estate showcased rare specimens she had cultivated through years of patient care. "Eleanor, do not trouble yourself with that tea tray. I can manage perfectly well," Vivian called to the maid who hovered nervously by the doorway. "It's no trouble at all, my lady," Eleanor replied, setting down the silver tray with practiced precision, though her hands trembled slightly. "And Mrs. Harrison has sent up those shortbread biscuits you favour." Vivian smiled warmly. "How thoughtful. Please extend my gratitude to her." She observed the young maid's nervous demeanour. "Eleanor, you're doing splendidly. There's no need for such anxiety in this household." The girl's shoulders relaxed visibly. "Thank you, my lady. You're most kind." As Eleanor departed, a large tabby cat leapt onto Vivian's lap with surprising agility for his substantial size, followed quickly by two smaller felines who positioned themselves at her feet. "Patience, Augustus," she chided the tabby gently, stroking his fur. "Dickens, Austin, do settle down. There's room for all of you." Augustus purred contentedly, kneading her skirts with sharp claws, while fixing her with an imperious golden stare. The cat had appeared at Ashford's kitchen door 3 winters ago, half-starved and injured. Vivian had nursed him back to health against the cook's protestations about vermin. Now he ruled the household with feline authority, deigning to accept affection primarily from Vivian herself. "You're terribly spoiled, all of you," Vivian murmured affectionately, reaching for her teacup while carefully balancing Augustus on her lap. Beyond the library windows, the manicured gardens of Ashford Estate stretched toward the rolling Derbyshire countryside. The Campbell family home had stood for generations, a testament to their noble lineage. While not the grandest estate in the county, it held a quiet dignity that Vivian had come to cherish. Her peaceful moment was interrupted by a discreet knock. "Lady Vivian," came a voice from the doorway. Her brother's valet, Phillips, stood with perfect posture. "Lord Campbell requests your presence in the drawing-room. Lady Elizabeth and her husband have arrived." "Ah, my dear sister returns," Vivian said, carefully displacing Augustus from her lap, despite his vocal protests. "I shall be there directly." Vivian stood, smoothing her dress, a modest gown of dove-grey silk with subtle lavender piping, several seasons out of fashion but still elegant. She glanced briefly at the looking-glass above the fireplace, tucking a stray curl into place. The reflection that gazed back at her was that of a handsome woman rather than a beautiful one. Strong features, intelligent blue eyes, and a determined chin that hinted at the stubborn streak her family knew all too well. The corridor leading to the drawing-room was lined with portraits of Campbell ancestors. The third portrait from the end was of her father, the late Marquess, painted in his prime with Vivian's mother seated beside him. Vivian paused briefly before it, as was her custom. 8 years since his passing, yet the ache of his absence remained. "You would be proud of James," she whispered to the portrait. "He's become the man you hoped he would be." What her father might think of her own life choices remained unspoken. In the grand drawing-room, Vivian's younger sister Elizabeth, now the Marchioness of Westfield, stood resplendent in a gown of emerald silk. At 32, Elizabeth had everything society deemed valuable: beauty, wealth, and most importantly, a prestigious marriage. "Vivian, dearest," Elizabeth embraced her with the scent of French perfume. "How well you look." "As do you, Lizzie," Vivian replied, genuinely pleased to see her sister despite the inevitable comparisons that accompanied her visits. "Marriage continues to agree with you, I see." "Indeed it does," Elizabeth beamed, placing a hand on her abdomen with telltale significance. though I expect it shall change my figure considerably in the coming months." Vivian's face lit with genuine delight. "Lizzie, is this your announcement? How wonderful." "Yes, after 3 years of waiting," Elizabeth confided, her voice dropping. "We've told no one but family yet. It's still early days." The Marquis of Westfield, a handsome man with a perpetual look of satisfaction, approached. "Lady Vivian, always a pleasure." "Lord Westfield," Vivian curtsied slightly, "congratulations on your happy news." Their brother James, the current Marquis of Campbell after their father's passing, entered with the confident stride that had charmed half the ladies in London. At 36, he remained one of England's most eligible bachelors, much to their late mother's dismay. "Sisters Westfield," he acknowledged with a nod. James possessed the Campbell height and bearing, his auburn hair several shades darker than Vivian's, his features more classically handsome. "I trust your journey from London was tolerable." "As tolerable as travel can be in my delicate condition," Elizabeth replied, accepting her brother's kiss on her cheek. "Ah, so you've shared your news," James grinned. "Excellent. The next generation begins." He gestured for everyone to be seated. "Speaking of news, I've received correspondence from an old acquaintance that may interest you all. The Duke of Blackmore will be visiting our corner of Derbyshire." Elizabeth gasped dramatically. "Andrew Fox, the Duke himself? Heavens! What brings him to our quiet countryside?" "Business matters, I presume," James replied, accepting a glass of brandy from Phillips, "though I suspect he seeks respite from London society as well." "The man has quite the reputation," Westfield commented, lowering his voice. "They say even Wellington himself was intimidated by his presence during the few years Fox served in the military. Cold as ice in the face of danger, and twice as deadly." "Nonsense," Vivian interjected, unable to contain herself. "No man is as fearsome as gossip would have us believe. I've found that legendary figures, upon meeting them, are invariably human, sometimes disappointingly so." James chuckled. "Dear sister, always the skeptic. Well, you shall judge for yourself. I've invited him to dine with us tomorrow evening." "You've done what?" Vivian set down her teacup with more force than intended. "James, surely you could have provided some warning." "Where's the excitement in that?" he replied with a mischievous grin. "Besides, it's merely dinner with an old friend." "An old friend with whom you once nearly came to blows at Cambridge," Vivian reminded him. "Ancient history," James waved dismissively. "We've long since reconciled, and I dare say his presence will liven up our provincial existence." "Not all of us require livening up," Vivian muttered. "Perhaps some of us do," James replied with unexpected seriousness, his gaze lingering on his elder sister. The conversation drifted to horses and hunting, then to London gossip. Vivian participated when necessary, but found her thoughts returning to the impending visit of the notorious Duke. Andrew Fox, Duke of Blackmore, was said to have the coldest eyes and the sharpest mind in England. Widows swooned in his presence, while their daughters were warned to maintain safe distance. Like most society legends, Vivian suspected the truth was likely more mundane. No doubt the Duke was simply a wealthy aristocrat, with perhaps unusual manners and the mystique that came with limited social appearances. Later that afternoon, Vivian escaped to the conservatory attached to the east wing of the house. This glass-enclosed garden had been her mother's pride, and maintaining it had become Vivian's responsibility after her passing. Exotic ferns and flowering plants from distant colonies flourished under her care, creating a perpetual spring regardless of the English weather beyond the glass walls. She moved among the plants with practiced ease, checking soil moisture and removing fading blooms. The physical work and earthy scents centered her in a way that social interactions rarely did. "I thought I might find you here," came James's voice from the doorway. He leaned against the frame, watching his sister with affectionate amusement. "Hiding among your green friends?" "Not hiding," Vivian corrected, continuing her work. "Recharging. You know how Elizabeth's energy exhausts me, much as I love her." James entered, careful not to disturb the delicate arrangement of potted specimens. "She means well." "They all do," Vivian sighed. "Everyone who reminds me, however subtly, of what I am not, a wife, a mother, a proper society woman content with embroidery and gossip." "You are something far more interesting," James countered. "A Campbell woman with a mind of her own." Vivian smiled reluctantly. "A dangerous combination, according to Mother?" Indeed. James picked up a watering can, helping as he sometimes did. About tomorrow's dinner. Must we revisit the subject? I'll be civil to your Duke, James. I'm always civil. That's precisely what concerns me, he replied, with surprising candor. You're always perfectly civil, perfectly proper, perfectly contained. When was the last time you allowed yourself to be merely Vivian? She looked at him sharply. What an odd question. Is it? James set down the watering can. You've built such walls around yourself, sister. Ever since Harrington's betrayal. We do not speak of that, Vivian interrupted, her voice suddenly cold. Ever. James raised his hands in surrender. As you wish. But know this. Not all men are alike, and not all situations repeat themselves. 20 years ago, at the tender age of 20, Vivian had believed herself in love with the young Lord Harrington. He had courted her with poems and promises, only to abruptly announce his engagement to an heiress with £10,000 more to her name. The public humiliation had been excruciating, the private heartbreak even worse. In the years that followed, there had been other suitors, primarily fortune hunters attracted to her substantial dowry. Vivian had seen through their flattery to the calculation beneath, and one by one she had refused them. Eventually the suitors stopped coming, and society bestowed upon her the label that defined unmarried women of a certain age, spinster. She had made peace with her situation long ago. Her life was comfortable, meaningful in its quiet way. If occasionally, in the depth of night, she felt the absence of companionship more keenly, that was her secret to bear. That evening, Vivian sat at her dressing table as Sarah, her lady's maid of 15 years, brushed out her hair. Duke visiting tomorrow, my lady," Sarah remarked, her skilled hands separating Vivian's hair into sections for braiding. "How exciting." Vivian responded non-committally, studying her reflection. Fine lines framed her eyes now, telling stories of both laughter and tears. Yet the bloom of youth had faded, and with it society's interest in her as a potential bride. "Will you wear the blue silk, my lady? It complements your eyes beautifully." "I hardly think my attire will matter, Sarah. The Duke of Blackmore will scarcely notice the presence of a spinster at the dinner table." Vivian immediately regretted the bitterness that crept into her voice. "Nonsense," Sarah replied with unusual boldness. 40 is hardly ancient. And you're far lovelier than half the young debutantes paraded before gentlemen these days, all giggles and no substance." Vivian smiled at her loyal maid's reflection. "Your kindness outpaces your honesty, dear Sarah, but I appreciate the sentiment all the same." She reached for a silver-backed brush, running her fingers over the engraved initials, Veek, Vivian Eleanor Campbell, a gift from her father on her 16th birthday. "It's not kindness, my lady, but truth," Sarah insisted, securing the end of Vivian's braid with a ribbon. "Besides, they say the Duke is well into his 40s himself. Perhaps he prefers a woman of maturity. According to London gossip, the Duke prefers no company at all except his hounds and horses," Vivian countered. "In any case, I've long since abandoned girlish fantasies about gallant gentlemen." As Sarah departed, Vivian moved to the window seat, drawing back the heavy curtain to gaze at the night sky. The rain had cleared, leaving a canopy of stars above Ashford's grounds. In the distance, lights glowed in the tenant cottages. Families gathered around hearths, sharing the small joys and sorrows of ordinary lives. She opened her journal and penned her thoughts by candlelight. April 15th, 1853. Another eligible gentleman enters our circle, and once again I find myself the object of no one's attention, a role I have grown accustomed to playing. Perhaps there is freedom in invisibility. Yet sometimes, in moments of weakness, I wonder what it might feel like to be truly seen. Not as the Marquess's spinster sister, not as the efficient mistress of Ashford, but as Vivian, a woman with hopes and fears, strengths and frailties, dreams long deferred but not entirely forgotten. James suggests I have built walls around myself. Perhaps he is right, but walls serve a purpose. They protect what lies within. And having once had my heart trampled in the public square, I see little reason to risk it again, particularly at this late stage of my life. Tomorrow the notorious Duke arrives. No doubt he will be like all powerful men, concerned primarily with his own consequence. I shall be civil, as is my duty as a Campbell. Nothing more is required, and nothing more shall be offered. She closed the journal and extinguished the candle, darkness enveloping the room just as solitude had long since embraced her heart. Yet, as she slipped beneath the bedcovers, a strange restlessness stirred within her, as if the regular rhythm of her carefully ordered existence had somehow been disrupted, the first tremor of an earthquake whose magnitude she could not yet comprehend. "Nonsense," she whispered to herself in the darkness. "Tomorrow will be like any other day." But even as sleep claimed her, a small voice deep within whispered that perhaps, just perhaps, it would not. The following day, Ashford Estate buzzed with unusual activity. Extra footmen were positioned in the grand entryway, silver had been polished to a mirror shine, and Mrs. Harrison had been in the kitchen since dawn, preparing a feast worthy of royalty. Even James, typically indifferent to household matters, had inspected the dining room twice, ensuring everything was in perfect order for their distinguished guest. "One might think the king himself was coming to dinner," Vivian remarked dryly as she surveyed the elaborate floral arrangements Sarah had placed throughout the house. "The Duke of Blackmore outranks half the royal family in terms of influence, if not actual position," James replied, "and his visits anywhere are exceedingly rare." "I want everything to be perfect." "You're nervous," Vivian observed with surprise. "I've never seen you nervous about a social engagement before." James adjusted his already immaculate cravat. "Not nervous, merely mindful of the Duke's discerning nature. He doesn't suffer fools or poor hospitality gladly." "Then perhaps we should all wear sackcloth and tremble in his mighty presence," Vivian teased, though her brother's unusual behavior had piqued her curiosity further about their enigmatic guest. By late afternoon, Vivian retreated to her chambers to prepare for the evening. Sarah had laid out 3 gowns for her consideration: the safe dove-grey silk she often wore for dinner parties, a deep burgundy velvet that Vivian considered too formal for a family dinner, regardless of the guest, and the sapphire blue silk that had been her mother's favorite on her. The blue, I think, Vivian decided, surprising herself, and mother's pearls. Sarah smiled approvingly. "An excellent choice, my lady. Shall I style your hair with the pearl pins as well?" "Yes," Vivian nodded, "though not too elaborately. I'm not trying to impress anyone." "Of course not, my lady," Sarah replied, her tone carefully neutral, though her eyes sparkled with something like hope. As Sarah dressed her hair in a simple but elegant style, Vivian studied her reflection with unusual scrutiny. The blue silk complemented her eyes and fair complexion, while the modest cut flattered her still slender figure without drawing undue attention to the subtle signs of age. "You look beautiful, my lady," Sarah said, standing back to admire her work. "Thank you, Sarah," Vivian replied, adjusting the pearl pendant at her throat, her father's gift on her 21st birthday. She had worn it at her first ball, where Lord Harrington had asked her to dance 3 times, breaking all rules of propriety and setting society tongues wagging. How young and foolish she had been then, mistaking attention for affection, flattery for sincerity. A commotion downstairs signaled the arrival of their distinguished guest. Taking a deep breath, Vivian descended the grand staircase with measured steps, determined to approach the evening with the same calm dignity she brought to all social obligations. The Duke of Blackmore stood in the center of the entrance hall, his commanding presence seeming to fill the entire space. Tall and broad-shouldered, he cut an imposing figure in his impeccably tailored evening attire. His features were striking rather than conventionally handsome: a strong jaw, aquiline nose, and penetrating grey eyes beneath dark brows. His hair was black with silver at the temples, swept back from a high forehead. Though Vivian guessed him to be in his mid-40s, there was nothing soft or yielding about him. Rather, he possessed the hard-earned confidence of a man who had faced life's battles and emerged victorious. "Fox," James greeted him warmly, clasping his hand. "Welcome to Ashford. How long has it been? 5 years?" 7, the Duke corrected, his deep voice resonating in the hall. "Your father's funeral. A good man, your father." "Indeed he was," James nodded solemnly. "Allow me to reacquaint you with my family. You remember my sister, Lady Elizabeth, now the Marchioness of Westfield." Elizabeth curtsied gracefully, her emerald gown rustling. "Your Grace, how kind of you to join us." "Marchioness," he acknowledged with a slight bow. "And her husband, Lord Westfield." The 2 men exchanged formal nods. "And my elder sister, Lady Vivian Campbell." As Vivian curtsied before the Duke, she felt his gaze upon her with unexpected intensity. When she rose and met his eyes, something indefinable passed between them, a spark of recognition, though they had never formally met. "Lady Vivian," he said, taking her hand. His touch was warm, his grip firm but gentle. "The pleasure is entirely mine." "Your Grace," she responded, willing her voice to remain steady. "Welcome to Ashford." For a moment longer than propriety dictated, he held her gaze, something like surprise flickering briefly across his stern features before his expression returned to impassive courtesy. Vivian found herself unaccountably flustered, a sensation she had not experienced in many years. During dinner, served in the formal dining room with the best Sèvres china and crystal, Vivian observed the Duke with cautious curiosity. Unlike most aristocrats who dominated conversation with tales of their own importance, he spoke little, but listened intently. When he did speak, his observations were incisive and occasionally tinged with dry humor that surprised genuine laughter from the company. "Your agricultural improvements at Blackmoor are legendary, Your Grace," Westfield remarked, as the main course was served. "I understand your wheat yield has doubled in the last 3 years." "Good land management is simply good business," the Duke replied. "Though I cannot claim all the credit. My tenants work the land. I merely provide the means for them to do so efficiently." "Still, such yields are remarkable," James added. "Half the landowners in England would sell their souls to duplicate your success." "I prefer they sell me their outdated equipment instead," the Duke responded, with a hint of a smile. "Souls are useless for farming." Vivian found herself unexpectedly charmed by this glimpse of humor from a man reputed to be so severe. Throughout the meal, she noticed his gaze returning to her periodically, though he addressed most of his conversation to James and Westfield. "Your sister is rather quiet," she overheard him remark to James as the gentleman prepared to join the ladies for tea after dinner. "Vivian? She speaks when she has something of value to say. A rare quality these days," James replied. "Indeed," the Duke agreed. "Most rare and most valuable." In the drawing-room, Elizabeth entertained the company with stories of London society, while Vivian prepared the tea service, a task she preferred to leave to her own hands rather than the servants, having particular ideas about the proper brewing of tea. "Allow me to assist you," came the Duke's deep voice beside her, startling her into nearly dropping a porcelain cup. "Your Grace," she acknowledged, recovering her composure. "There's no need, I'm quite capable." "I don't doubt your capability, Lady Vivian," he replied, taking the heavy silver teapot from her hands nonetheless. "I merely question the wisdom of refusing assistance when it's sincerely offered." Their fingers brushed during the exchange, sending an unexpected warmth through Vivian's body. She busied herself with arranging cups on saucers to disguise her momentary discomposure. "Cream? Sugar?" she inquired, once the tea was poured. "Neither," he answered. "I prefer to taste what I consume without disguise." Vivian raised an eyebrow at this. "How admirably direct! Though sometimes, Your Grace, a bit of sweetness makes the bitter more palatable." "Does it?" he countered, his grey eyes holding hers. "Or merely masks what should be confronted honestly?" Before she could formulate a response to this unexpectedly philosophical turn in the conversation, they were interrupted by Elizabeth, calling for the Duke's opinion on some London gossip. Vivian retreated to the window seat with her tea, oddly unsettled by the exchange. Later, as guests mingled in the drawing-room, Vivian found herself momentarily alone, examining a chess set by the window. The Duke appeared beside her, his approach so quiet she nearly started. "Do you play, Lady Vivian?" he inquired, gesturing to the chessboard. "I do, Your Grace, though my brother claims I'm an overly cautious player." "Caution can be a virtue in chess, as in life," he observed, setting up the pieces with practiced hands, "though there comes a time when one must risk a valuable piece to win the game." "And are you a risk-taker, Your Grace?" she asked, surprising herself with her boldness. A hint of a smile crossed his face. "Only when the prize is worth the peril." They played in companionable silence for several minutes, each move deliberate. Vivian found herself genuinely challenged by his strategy, which was neither recklessly aggressive nor overly defensive, but displayed a thoughtful balance that kept her continually reassessing her position. "Checkmate in 3 moves," he finally said. Vivian studied the board, then nodded in acknowledgement of her defeat. "Well played, Your Grace. Few opponents see that particular vulnerability in my defense. Perhaps because few take the time to truly observe, he replied, his eyes meeting hers with unsettling directness. You play as you live, Lady Vivian, with intelligence and care protecting your essential pieces, yet sometimes the Queen must venture into enemy territory, despite the danger. The Queen is often sacrificed to protect the King, Vivian countered. Only by poor players, the Duke replied. The Queen is the most powerful piece on the board. To sacrifice her demonstrates either desperation or profound incompetence. Vivian was saved from responding to this loaded statement by James calling for music. Elizabeth obliged with a pianoforte performance, followed by Westfield's surprisingly pleasant baritone in a popular ballad. "Will you not favour us with a song, Lady Vivian?" the Duke inquired, as the applause for Westfield subsided. "I fear my modest abilities would suffer by comparison, Your Grace," Vivian demurred. "Nonsense," James interjected. "Vivian has the finest voice in the family. She's merely being modest." "Then her modesty does her a disservice," the Duke observed, offering his arm to escort her to the pianoforte. "Will you not reconsider?" Finding herself unable to refuse gracefully, Vivian allowed him to lead her to the instrument. She selected a traditional English folk song, one she had loved since childhood. Her voice, clear and true if not professionally trained, filled the drawing room with a melody both wistful and sweet. The song told of a young woman who disguised herself as a sailor to follow her love to sea, revealing herself only when she saved his life in battle. When she finished, there was a moment of appreciative silence before the applause began. The Duke, standing nearby, regarded her with an expression she could not interpret. "A curious choice," he remarked quietly. "A woman who defies convention for love's sake." "Merely a song I've always enjoyed," Vivian replied, though his observation made her reconsider her unconscious selection. "I think we reveal more of ourselves in such choices than we intend," he said. "Thank you for sharing your talent, Lady Vivian. Your voice is as honest as your gaze." As the evening drew to a close and guests began to depart, Vivian stood near the entrance, bidding farewell to Elizabeth and her husband. She was acutely aware of the Duke's presence nearby as he spoke with James about plans for riding the following day. When it came time for his own departure, the Duke approached Vivian last. Taking her hand, he bowed over it with perfect courtesy. "Lady Vivian, the evening has been illuminating. I'm pleased you found our humble gathering to your satisfaction, Your Grace," she responded with practiced politeness. He stepped closer then, ostensibly to retrieve his gloves from the nearby table. As he did so, he leaned slightly toward her, his voice dropping to a whisper meant for her ears alone. "Lady Vivian, a pleasure to make your acquaintance. Know this, you are mine." Before she could react, he had straightened, nodded formally to the assembled family, and departed into the night, leaving Vivian frozen in place, her heart hammering in her chest. "Are you unwell, Vivian?" James inquired, noticing her pallor. "You look as though you've seen a ghost." "I'm quite well," she managed to reply. "Just tired from the evening's festivities." In the privacy of her chambers, Vivian paced restlessly, replaying the Duke's words in her mind. Surely she had misheard him, or perhaps it was some peculiar jest. A man like the Duke of Blackmore could not possibly have any genuine interest in her. "I've been reading too many novels," she murmured to herself, as Augustus the cat watched her with unblinking yellow eyes. "These romantic notions are clouding my judgment." Yet she could not dismiss the memory of his intense gaze, the deliberate way he had spoken those words. Sleep eluded her that night, as she drifted between dismissing the encounter as fantasy and reliving it with startling clarity. The following morning brought a bouquet of rare orchids, flowers Vivian had mentioned admiring during a brief discussion of the conservatory. No card accompanied the delivery, but the footman reported they had been sent from Oakwell Court, the Duke's nearby property. "What an unusual gift," Elizabeth remarked, examining the exotic blooms with frank curiosity during her morning visit to Vivian's sitting room. "Orchids are notoriously difficult to cultivate in England." "Indeed," Vivian replied, arranging the flowers in a crystal vase. "His Grace mentioned an interest in botany during dinner. I suspect this is merely a courteous acknowledgement of our shared interest." Elizabeth studied her sister's face with sudden shrewdness. "The Duke seemed unusually attentive to you last evening, Vivian. Did he say anything of note when you were playing chess?" "Nothing of consequence," Vivian answered, avoiding her sister's penetrating gaze. "Merely observations about strategy and technique." Elizabeth responded, clearly unconvinced. "Well, it's curious that he should send flowers to you specifically, rather than to the household generally. Most curious indeed." After Elizabeth departed, Vivian found herself drawn to the orchids repeatedly throughout the day, their exotic beauty and subtle fragrance both alluring and unsettling, much like the man who had sent them. 3 days passed without further communication from the Duke, though James mentioned seeing him at the local gentlemen's club. Vivian had almost convinced herself that the incident had been misconstrued, perhaps even imagined, when a note arrived, delivered by a liveried messenger from Oakwell Court. "Lady Vivian, I find myself in need of experienced guidance regarding certain botanical specimens recently acquired for Oakwell's conservatory. If convenient, might I impose upon your expertise tomorrow afternoon? My carriage shall call for you at 2 o'clock, unless I receive word that the appointment is unsuitable. Your servant, Blackmore." The note was formal, proper, yet the presumption of her acceptance, the commanding tone beneath the courteous words, sent a shiver of something between irritation and anticipation through Vivian. "What shall I reply, my lady?" Sarah asked, waiting by the door. Vivian hesitated only briefly. "Please inform the messenger that I shall be ready at the appointed time." As Sarah departed, Vivian moved to the window, gazing out at the spring landscape. What game was the Duke playing? And more troublingly, why did she find herself so willing to participate? The following day dawned bright and clear, perfect weather for a drive through the countryside. Vivian selected a walking dress of lavender muslin with a matching pelisse and bonnet, suitable for both a social call and a tour of gardens or conservatory. "Will you require my attendance, my lady?" Sarah inquired, as she fastened the tiny buttons at Vivian's wrists. "Yes," Vivian replied decisively. "Propriety must be observed, regardless of the Duke's botanical emergencies." At precisely 2 o'clock, the Duke's carriage, an elegant equipage drawn by 4 perfectly matched greys, arrived at Ashford's entrance. To Vivian's surprise, the Duke himself handed her into the carriage, rather than sending a footman. "Lady Vivian," he bowed, "you are punctual. Another admirable quality." "Your Grace," she acknowledged, settling onto the plush seat with Sarah beside her. "I understand you have botanical concerns requiring attention." "Indeed," he replied, taking the seat opposite. With a signal to the coachman, they were underway, the carriage moving smoothly along the country lane. "Though I confess the specimens are merely a convenient excuse to secure your company." Vivian raised an eyebrow. "Most gentlemen would simply issue an invitation to tea, Your Grace." "I am not most gentlemen," he stated simply, "and I suspected you might refuse a more conventional invitation." "You presume a great deal about my inclinations," Vivian observed, though without real heat. His directness, while disconcerting, was also refreshing after years of social dissembling. "Do I?" he challenged mildly. "You declined the Rutherford Ball last month and the Pembroke Musicale the week prior. According to your brother, you rarely accept social invitations of late." "You've been discussing me with James?" Vivian asked, genuinely surprised. "I make it a practice to learn all I can about subjects that interest me," the Duke replied without apology. "And I am a subject of interest," Vivian countered, finding her footing in this unusual conversation. "The primary one at present," he confirmed, his grey eyes holding hers with that same unsettling directness she remembered from the dinner party. The rest of the journey passed in conversation about the countryside, the unusually fine spring weather, and the history of Oakwell Court, which had belonged to the Duke's family for generations, but had stood empty for many years until his recent decision to renovate it. As they approached the estate, Vivian was struck by the elegant proportions of the Palladian-style mansion nestled among ancient oaks. The grounds showed evidence of recent work: newly planted flower beds, freshly gravelled paths, and carefully pruned shrubbery. "You've accomplished a great deal in a short time," Vivian observed, as the Duke handed her down from the carriage. "When I decide on a course of action, I see no point in delay," he replied, offering his arm to escort her toward the house. The interior of Oakwell revealed similar transformation: freshly painted walls, polished floors, and new furnishings, combining with ancestral portraits and antique pieces to create an atmosphere both dignified and welcoming. The Duke led them through a series of impressive rooms to a recently constructed conservatory at the rear of the house. "This is my latest project," he explained, gesturing to the glass-enclosed space filled with a variety of plants. "My grandfather was something of a botanical enthusiast. I'm attempting to restore his collection, but find myself lacking his expertise." Vivian moved among the plants with professional interest, noting several rare specimens alongside more common varieties. "You've made an excellent start," she commented, examining a particularly fine specimen of Cattleya orchid. "Though some of these tropical varieties will require specific conditions to thrive in the English climate." For the next hour, Vivian provided detailed advice about temperature, humidity, and care for various plants, while the Duke listened attentively, occasionally making notes in a small leather-bound book. Sarah remained discreetly nearby, though her presence seemed almost forgotten as Vivian became increasingly engaged in the botanical discussion. Eventually, the Duke suggested they take tea on the terrace, overlooking the newly landscaped garden. As they sat in comfortable chairs beneath a striped awning, Vivian found herself more relaxed in his company than she would have thought possible. "You never answered my question from the other evening," the Duke remarked, as a footman poured tea, "about being a risk-taker." "I believe the question was directed at you, Your Grace," Vivian corrected. "Then allow me to clarify my answer," he said, dismissing the servants with a nod. "I am selective in my risks. I do not gamble frivolously or challenge men to duels over trivial matters, as some might believe from society gossip. But when something, or someone, of true value presents itself, I am prepared to risk a great deal indeed." The intensity of his gaze left no doubt about his meaning. Vivian set down her teacup carefully, conscious of a sudden trembling in her hands. "Your Grace—" "Andrew," he interrupted. "My name is Andrew." "That would hardly be appropriate," she replied, startled. "Few worthwhile things are," he countered, his gaze unwavering. "I must apologize if my words at our last meeting disturbed you. They were presumptuous." "They were unexpected," Vivian admitted, "and rather cryptic, yet not untrue," he replied simply. "Your Grace—" "Andrew," he insisted, "I fear you may be laboring under some misapprehension. I am 40 years old, long past the age where gentlemen express romantic interest. If this is some form of amusement, do I strike you as a man who amuses himself with the feelings of others?" he interrupted, his tone suddenly sharp. "I hardly know you well enough to judge," she countered. "Then perhaps we should remedy that," he said, his voice softening. "Would you permit me to call at Ashford tomorrow and the day after, and however many days it takes for you to recognize the sincerity of my regard?" Vivian studied his face, searching for any sign of mockery or deception. Finding none, she felt a dangerous hope begin to stir within her carefully guarded heart. "And I would not object to your calls," she finally replied, choosing her words with care, "though I make no promises about their outcome." "I ask for none," he said, reaching across the small table to cover her hand briefly with his. "Only the opportunity to demonstrate that my interest is genuine and my intentions honorable." The touch of his hand, warm and strong against her skin, sent an unexpected thrill through Vivian's body. She withdrew her hand carefully, not wishing to appear either too eager or too resistant. As they prepared to depart, the Duke selected a perfect white camellia from the garden and presented it to Vivian with a formal bow. "A token of appreciation for your botanical expertise," he said, though his eyes conveyed a deeper meaning. The journey back to Ashford passed in conversation that seemed determined to remain on safe, impersonal topics: the weather, local landmarks, mutual acquaintances in London society. Yet beneath the conventional exchange ran an undercurrent of awareness that made even the most innocuous remarks seem charged with significance. As the Duke handed her down from the carriage at Ashford's entrance, he retained her hand a moment longer than necessary. "Until tomorrow, Lady Vivian." "Until tomorrow, Your Grace," she replied, unable to prevent a small smile from curving her lips. Watching the carriage depart, Vivian touched the perfect camellia tucked into her pelisse. For the first time in many years, she felt the stirring of emotions she had thought long buried: excitement, anticipation, and beneath it all a tentative hope that perhaps, against all expectations, life still held the possibility of surprise. The following week brought unexpected sunshine to Derbyshire, and with it the Duke's continued presence in Vivian's life. True to his word, he called at Ashford the day after their visit to Oakwell Court, arriving precisely at the acceptable hour for morning visits. Each day thereafter followed the same pattern. The Duke's elegant carriage appearing in the drive, his tall figure striding purposefully toward the house, and conversations that ranged from literature to politics to personal philosophies. James observed these developments with a mixture of amusement and concern. "Fox has called every day this week," he remarked casually, as he and Vivian breakfasted together on Sunday morning. "One might almost suspect he has developed an interest in something beyond Ashford's agricultural methods." "Don't be ridiculous," Vivian replied, though a telltale flush coloured her cheeks. "His Grace is merely being neighbourly during his stay in Derbyshire." "Neighbourly?" James repeated sceptically. "Of course. How foolish of me to imagine the most notorious bachelor in England might have other motivations for daily visits to a house containing an unmarried lady." "I'm hardly the sort of lady to attract a duke's romantic attention," Vivian countered, spreading marmalade on her toast with careful precision. "You underestimate yourself, sister," James observed, his expression turning serious. "Always have. But I know Fox. When he sets his mind on something or someone, he pursues it with singular determination." "You make him sound like a hunter stalking prey," Vivian said, discomfited by the comparison. "Perhaps not far from the truth," James mused. "Though I've never known him to pursue without honourable intent." Before Vivian could respond to this cryptic remark, Phillips entered to announce that the vicar had arrived to speak with the Marquis about parish matters. Left alone with her thoughts, Vivian found herself dwelling on her brother's words. Could the Duke's attentions truly be of a romantic nature? The possibility seemed both thrilling and terrifying. On Wednesday afternoon, Vivian sat in the garden with her book when Sarah appeared, with news that made her heart leap to her throat. "The Duke of Blackmore has called, my lady. He awaits you in the blue drawing-room." Vivian smoothed her day dress, a simple lavender muslin that was respectable but hardly her finest, and steeled herself before entering the drawing-room. The Duke stood by the window, examining a small bronze sculpture. He turned at her entrance, his expression warming visibly. "Lady Vivian," he bowed, "forgive my unannounced visit." "Your Grace," she curtsied. "No forgiveness necessary. We country folk are accustomed to less rigid social schedules than London society." A faint smile touched his lips, one of the countryside's many charms. An awkward silence fell between them until Vivian gathered her courage. "May I inquire as to the purpose of your visit, Your Grace? I was not expecting you until tomorrow." "I find myself increasingly unwilling to wait for scheduled appointments to see you," he replied with characteristic directness. "As for purpose, must there always be one beyond the pleasure of your company?" "Society generally demands more practical reasons for social calls," Vivian observed. "I have never been overly concerned with society's demands," he countered. "Though, if you require a pretext, I've brought something that might interest you." He retrieved a small leather case from beside his chair and opened it to reveal several pressed botanical specimens, carefully preserved between sheets of transparent paper. "These are extraordinary," Vivian exclaimed, momentarily forgetting her composure as she examined the rare alpine flowers. "Where did you find them?" "Switzerland during my travels after Cambridge," he replied, clearly pleased by her reaction. "I recalled our conversation about European flora and thought you might appreciate them." "They're beautiful," she said sincerely. "Thank you for thinking of me." "I find myself thinking of little else these days," he said quietly. Vivian glanced up to find his grey eyes intent upon her face, his expression unguarded for once. The naked emotion she saw there, admiration, desire, and something deeper she dared not name, stole her breath. "Your Grace." "Andrew," he corrected gently. "After a week of daily conversations, surely we might dispense with formalities, at least in private." Vivian hesitated, then nodded slightly. "Andrew, then, though only in private." His smile at this small concession was transformative, softening the harsh lines of his face and revealing a glimpse of a younger, less guarded man beneath the ducal facade. "Would you walk with me in the garden, Vivian? With your maid as chaperone, of course." The sound of her name on his lips sent an unexpected thrill through her body. "Yes," she agreed, "I should like that." As they strolled among the rose bushes, Sarah following at a discreet distance, Andrew spoke of his life, his childhood as a second son, unexpectedly elevated to dukedom after his brother's death from typhoid 15 years earlier, his brief military career, his current work improving conditions on his estates. "And you have never married," Vivian observed, then flushed at her own boldness. No, he replied simply. I've never found a woman who saw beyond the title to the man beneath, until recently. The implication hung between them, both thrilling and terrifying in its clarity. I find that difficult to believe, Vivian said carefully. Surely many women would be honored by your attention. By the Duke's attention, certainly, he agreed, but few have bothered to know Andrew beneath the title. You speak to me as a man, not a position in the peerage. You challenge me when I deserve it, laugh with me when I attempt humor, and show no sign of the tedious deference that makes most social interaction so empty. Perhaps I'm simply less accomplished at proper deference than most ladies, Vivian suggested. Perhaps you're simply more genuine, he countered, a quality I've come to value above all others. Before Vivian could respond to this pointed remark, they were interrupted by the arrival of her brother, returning from his ride. Fox, making yourself at home, I see, James called out with forced joviality. Something in his expression suggested he was not entirely pleased to find the Duke alone with his sister. Campbell, Andrew acknowledged, your sister has been kind enough to entertain me in your absence. Has she indeed? James replied, his smile not reaching his eyes. Vivian has always been the soul of courtesy, even to unexpected guests. The subtle emphasis on unexpected was not lost on either of them. I should take my leave, Andrew said, bowing to Vivian. Lady Vivian, thank you for a most enlightening conversation. After he had departed, James turned to his sister with an unusually serious expression. Be careful, Vivian. Fox is not like the fortune hunters who sought your dowry in your youth. He is a law unto himself. I'm hardly in any danger, James, she replied, trying to keep her tone light. What possible interest could the Duke have in a woman of my age and situation? James studied her thoughtfully. You underestimate yourself, sister. Always have. But I know Fox. When he wants something, he pursues it relentlessly. And from the way he looked at you just now, I fear you have become his latest quarry. That's absurd, Vivian protested. And even if it were true, I am perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. Of course, James conceded with a sigh. You always have been the sensible one among us. Just proceed with caution. In the days that followed, Andrew called at Ashford with increasing regularity. Each visit revealed new facets of his character, his dry wit, his passion for agricultural improvements, his unexpected kindness to servants and tenants. Despite her initial skepticism, Vivian found herself drawn to him. On a particularly fine day, he invited her to ride out to see the improvements he was making at Oakwell Court. Properly chaperoned by both her maid and his groom, they rode side by side through the countryside. People fear what they do not understand, Andrew remarked as they discussed his fearsome reputation. I've never troubled myself to correct their misconceptions. And does that not grow lonely? Vivian asked. Being perpetually misunderstood? He glanced at her sharply. Yes, he admitted after a moment. It does. At Oakwell, Vivian was surprised by the transformation already underway. What had been a neglected estate was coming alive again with new plantings, repaired cottages, and a small school for the tenants' children. This is remarkable, she said sincerely as they walked through the gardens. You've accomplished so much in so little time. I have plans for more, he replied. Much more. As they stood overlooking a newly dug pond, Andrew turned to face her directly. What I said that night at Ashford was impulsive but sincere. From the moment I saw you, I recognized something in you that answers to something in me. Call it madness if you will, but I believe we are meant for each other. Vivian felt her chest tighten with both hope and fear. Andrew, surely you can see how improbable this is. The Ton would never accept such a match. A duke and a what? He challenged. An intelligent, compassionate, beautiful woman who happens to be a few years older than the typical brainless debutante? If that is an obstacle, it exists only in your mind, not mine. You hardly know me, she protested weakly. I know enough, he insisted. I know that you read philosophy as well as novels. I know you care deeply for your family and tenants. I know you play chess with strategy and patience. I know your eyes reveal thoughts you're too polite to speak. And I wish to know more. Everything, if you will permit me. Vivian turned away, overwhelmed by emotions she had long since buried. This is happening too quickly. I need time to think. Take all the time you need, he replied. But know this, my feelings will not change. As they rode back to Ashford in silence, Vivian's mind raced with contradictory thoughts. Could this extraordinary man truly desire her? Or was this some elaborate game whose rules she did not understand? And even if his intentions were genuine, did she dare risk her heart after decades of carefully guarding it? The following days brought no clarity to her confusion. Andrew, true to his word, did not pressure her for an answer, but continued his visits. Their conversations remained stimulating, their growing friendship evident to all who observed them together. Yet beneath the surface pleasantries, an undercurrent of tension vibrated between them, the unspoken question of what might come next. News of the Duke's interest in the spinster Campbell sister spread through county society with predictable speed. Invitations that had dwindled over the years suddenly multiplied, as hostesses eager to witness the unusual relationship firsthand sought to include both parties in their gatherings. 3 invitations arrived this morning alone, James remarked, sorting through the post at breakfast. The Harringtons' summer ball, Lady Pembroke's musical, and the Rutherfords' garden party. It seems you've become quite the social commodity, sister. How tedious, Vivian sighed. I've no desire to become a public spectacle for gossip-mongers to dissect. Perhaps not, James agreed, but Fox will undoubtedly attend the Harrington ball at least. It might be prudent for you to appear as well, lest your absence fuel even more speculation. Reluctantly, Vivian conceded the wisdom of this suggestion. That afternoon, when Andrew called, she mentioned her decision to attend the ball. Excellent, he approved. I had hoped you would. May I request the honor of the first dance? If you wish, Vivian replied, striving for nonchalance despite the flutter in her stomach at the prospect of dancing with him before all of county society. The week before the ball, an unexpected visitor arrived at Ashford. Lady Caroline Rutherford, daughter of the Duke of Stratton, who was staying with her aunt, Lady Harrington. Blonde, beautiful, and barely 20, Caroline embodied everything society valued in a prospective duchess. Lady Vivian, she curtsied gracefully in Ashford's morning room. How kind of you to receive me without notice. Lady Caroline, Vivian acknowledged, instinctively wary of the calculating look in the young woman's eyes despite her sweet smile. What brings you to Ashford? I've come with a message from my aunt regarding the ball, Caroline explained, arranging her fashionable skirts as she sat. She wishes to know if you have any dietary restrictions for the supper. How thoughtful, Vivian replied, though she suspected Lady Harrington could easily have sent a servant with such a simple inquiry. Please assure your aunt that I have no special requirements. I shall, Caroline smiled, then leaned forward conspiratorially. I must confess, I have another purpose in calling. I've heard so much about the famous Duke of Blackmore and his interest in Derbyshire society. I understand he calls here quite frequently. His Grace is an old friend of my brother's, Vivian stated neutrally. Of course, Caroline nodded, though her tone suggested disbelief. It's just that, well, there has been an understanding between our families for some time. The Duke and I are expected to make an announcement this season. Vivian felt as though the air had been sucked from the room. I see, she managed to say, her voice sounding distant even to her own ears. Then I wish you both every happiness. Caroline's blue eyes widened with practiced innocence. Oh, there's been no formal proposal yet, but Daddy and the Duke have had an arrangement since I was 16. I'm sure he's simply being neighbourly cop during his stay here. The implication was clear, and the barb struck home with painful precision. Vivian maintained her composure through the remainder of the visit, but as soon as Caroline departed, she retreated to the conservatory, seeking solace among her plants. Of course it made sense. A man of Andrew's position would naturally seek a young, beautiful bride of appropriate lineage. His attentions to Vivian had likely been nothing more than a diversion during his country sojourn, perhaps even a test of his appeal before pursuing his real matrimonial target. When Phillips announced the Duke's arrival later that afternoon, Vivian sent word that she was indisposed with a headache. The following day she did the same. On the third day she could avoid him no longer. You've been avoiding me, Andrew stated without preamble as he entered the morning room where Vivian sat with her embroidery. I've been unwell, she replied, not meeting his gaze. You've been hiding, he corrected, his tone gentle despite the accusation. Why? Vivian set aside her needlework, finally looking up at him. The concern in his grey eyes nearly undid her resolve. Lady Caroline Rutherford called several days ago. Andrew's expression darkened immediately. I see. She spoke of an understanding between your families, Vivian continued, striving to keep her voice steady. An expected announcement this season. There is no understanding, he replied firmly. Stratton has been pushing for such a match for years, but I have never encouraged it. She seemed quite certain, Vivian persisted. Then she has been misled, either by her father's wishful thinking or her own vanity, Andrew said, pacing the room with controlled energy. I have never given Stratton or his daughter any reason to expect an offer. Vivian studied his face, searching for any sign of deception. Why would she lie? Because Stratton desperately needs the connection to shore up his failing finances, Andrew explained. And perhaps because someone informed her of my interest in you and she sought to eliminate what she perceives as competition. That's absurd, Vivian protested. I could hardly be considered competition for someone like Lady Caroline. There is no competition, Andrew stated firmly, moving to kneel beside her chair, an unprecedented gesture that left Vivian speechless. There is only you, Vivian. There has been only you from the moment we met. Taking her hands in his, he continued with quiet intensity. I am not a man given to romantic declarations or impulsive actions. When I spoke those words to you that night, you are mine, they were not a claim of possession but a recognition of truth. Something in my soul recognized its counterpart in yours. I have spent these weeks confirming what I knew instinctively then, that you are the woman I have waited for all my life. Tears welled in Vivian's eyes at the naked emotion in his face. Andrew, You need not answer now, he interrupted gently. I know you have doubts. About me, about the disparity in our positions, about society's reaction. I ask only that you give us, a chance to discover if what I believe about our connection is true. Vivian looked down at their joined hands, his large and strong, hers slender and pale. I am afraid, she admitted softly. Not of you, but of hoping again. Of believing that happiness might still be possible at this stage of my life. Courage does not mean absence of fear, Andrew said, raising one hand to gently tilt her chin until she met his gaze. It means acting despite it. For a long moment, they remained thus, eyes locked in silent communion. Then, with deliberate care, Vivian turned her hand in his until their fingers intertwined. I will attend the Harrington ball, she said quietly, and I will reserve the first dance for you, as promised. A smile transformed Andrew's stern features. I shall count the hours, he replied, raising her hand to his lips in a gesture both courtly and intimate. After he departed, Vivian stood at the window, watching his tall figure stride toward his waiting horse. Something had shifted between them today. A threshold crossed, a decision made, though not yet fully articulated. The prospect both thrilled and terrified her. Well, she murmured to herself, touching her hand where his lips had pressed, it seems I still possess some measure of courage after all. In the days leading up to the Harrington ball, Vivian found herself caught in a whirlwind of preparation. Elizabeth arrived from London with trunks of fashionable gowns, determined that her sister should outshine every other lady at the event. This one, Elizabeth declared, holding up a gown of deep sapphire silk with delicate silver embroidery, with mother's diamonds. The Duke won't be able to take his eyes off you. Lizzie, please, Vivian protested, though she couldn't help admiring the gown's elegant lines. You speak as though my sole purpose is to captivate his grace. Isn't it? Elizabeth countered with a knowing smile. Don't attempt to dissemble with me, Vivian. I've seen how you look at each other. The entire county has noticed. Then the entire county needs more productive pastimes, Vivian retorted, though she felt her cheeks warm at her sister's observation. On the night of the ball, as Sarah arranged her hair in an elegant style accented with diamond pins, Vivian hardly recognized the woman in the mirror. The sapphire gown, cut in the latest London fashion, complemented her fair complexion and auburn hair. The Campbell diamonds at her throat and ears caught the candlelight, lending a glow to her features. You look beautiful, my lady, Sarah said sincerely, adjusting a final curl. Truly breathtaking. Thank you, Sarah, Vivian replied, uncharacteristically nervous. Tonight felt like a turning point, a moment when the careful life she had constructed might change irrevocably, for better or worse. As their carriage approached Harrington Hall, Vivian could see the building ablaze with light. Carriages lined up along the circular drive as Derbyshire society gathered for the most anticipated event of the summer season. James, resplendent in formal attire, squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Remember, you have nothing to prove to anyone," he said quietly, "least of all to Fox." "I know," Vivian nodded, grateful for her brother's support despite his lingering concerns about the Duke's intentions. The entrance hall was crowded with guests in their finery, conversations buzzing like a hive of bees as the Campbells were announced. Vivian felt numerous eyes turn in her direction, assessing her appearance with varying degrees of curiosity and, in some cases, barely concealed surprise at her transformation. She moved through the receiving line with practiced grace, exchanging pleasantries with Lord and Lady Harrington while scanning the room for a particular tall figure. There was no sign of the Duke yet, and Vivian felt a mixture of relief and disappointment. "Lady Vivian, how lovely you look," came a sweet voice beside her. Lady Caroline stood resplendent in a gown of pale pink that emphasized her youth and golden beauty. "That shade of blue is so mature, perfect for your coloring." The veiled barb was delivered with such a perfect smile that Vivian could only marvel at the young woman's practiced malice. "Thank you, Lady Caroline. Pink suits your youth admirably as well." Caroline's smile faltered slightly at the counter-thrust. Before she could respond, a murmur ran through the crowd near the entrance. Vivian turned to see Andrew entering the ballroom, his commanding presence causing a momentary lull in conversation. He cut an imposing figure in formal black evening attire, his only ornamentation a single diamond pin in his cravat. His gaze swept the room with apparent indifference until it found Vivian. Even across the crowded space, she felt the intensity of his regard like a physical touch. With purposeful strides, he crossed to where she stood, ignoring the numerous ladies who attempted to catch his attention along the way. Bowing formally before her, he took her hand. "Lady Vivian," he said, his voice carrying in the suddenly hushed area around them, "you outshine every star in the heavens tonight." "Your Grace," she curtsied, conscious of the many eyes upon them. "You are too kind." "Not kind. Truthful." He straightened, still holding her hand. "I believe this first dance is mine." As he led her to the dance floor, Vivian was acutely aware of the sensation his attentions were causing. Matrons whispered behind their fans, young ladies stared with undisguised envy, and gentlemen watched with expressions ranging from amusement to disapproval. "Everyone is watching us," she murmured, as they took their positions for the quadrille. "Let them watch," he replied with calm assurance. "Perhaps they'll learn something about courage." The dance brought them together and apart, their hands touching briefly before the pattern separated them again, much like the rhythm of their growing relationship, Vivian thought. When the music ended, Andrew did not immediately release her hand. "You've been the subject of considerable speculation these past weeks," he observed, leading her toward the terrace doors, where they might speak with relative privacy. "Does it trouble you?" "Less than I would have expected," she admitted, "though I confess it's strange to find myself the center of attention after so many years of social invisibility." "You were never invisible," he countered, "merely unappreciated by those lacking discernment." Outside on the terrace, the summer night was warm and fragrant with roses. A few other couples strolled at a distance, providing the appearance of propriety while allowing some semblance of private conversation. "You've been considering my proposition," Andrew stated, rather than asked. "Have you reached any conclusions?" Vivian gazed out at the darkened gardens, gathering her thoughts. "I believe that I would regret more deeply never knowing what might be possible between us than I would any consequences of finding out." Andrew's expression remained serious, though his eyes warmed with evident pleasure. "Does that mean—" "It means I am willing to explore this connection between us," she clarified, "to permit courtship in the traditional sense. I make no promises beyond that." "It is more than enough," he replied, his voice deepening with emotion. "For now." Before they could continue this significant conversation, they were interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected guest, Lady Caroline Rutherford, accompanied by her father, the Duke of Stratton. "Your Grace," Stratton boomed, a florid man with the confident manner of one accustomed to deference. "What a fortuitous encounter. Caroline has been most anxious for a dance with you." Andrew's expression cooled visibly. I'm afraid my dance card is fully committed this evening, Stratton. Surely you can spare one for your future, Stratton began, only to be cut off by Andrew's raised hand. I would speak with you privately, Stratton, Andrew said, his tone brooking no argument. Now. As the two men moved to a more secluded corner of the terrace, Vivian found herself alone with Caroline, whose perfect features had arranged themselves into an expression of sympathetic concern. Lady Vivian, I hope I haven't upset you with my presence, she said sweetly. Daddy insisted we attend, though I warned him the Duke might be otherwise engaged tonight. Not at all, Vivian replied with equal politeness, though I confess to some confusion. The Duke seems unaware of the understanding you mentioned between your families. Caroline's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Men can be so oblivious to social arrangements, can't they? Particularly when temporarily distracted. The implication was clear, and Vivian felt her earlier confidence waver. Was she indeed merely a diversion for the Duke, an amusement before he fulfilled his social obligation to marry a suitable young woman from an appropriate family? Before she could formulate a response, Andrew returned, his expression grim but determined. Lady Caroline, your father awaits you inside. Caroline curtsied with perfect grace, though her eyes flashed with frustrated anger. Good evening, Your Grace. Lady Vivian. As she departed, Andrew turned to Vivian, taking her hands in his. Whatever she said to you, disregard it. There is no arrangement, no understanding, no expectation of a match between our families. I have made this abundantly clear to Stratton, who will now ensure his daughter understands as well. She seemed very certain, Vivian said, hating the note of insecurity in her voice. Certainty and truth are not always aligned, Andrew replied, his thumb tracing a gentle pattern on the inside of her wrist. The only certainty I recognize is this. What I feel for you is real, Vivian, more real than anything I have ever known. Looking into his eyes, seeing the naked emotion there, Vivian felt the last of her doubts begin to dissolve. Whatever society might say, whatever obstacles might arise, the connection between them was undeniable, a recognition of kindred spirits that transcended conventional notions of suitable matches. I believe you, she said simply. His smile transformed his stern features, revealing the passionate heart beneath the ducal facade. Then dance with me again, he requested, offering his arm. Let us give the gossip something truly worth discussing. With newfound confidence, Vivian placed her hand on his arm. Together they returned to the ballroom, where the orchestra was striking up a waltz, a dance still considered daringly intimate in conservative country circles. Without hesitation, Andrew led her onto the floor, taking her in his arms with proper form but unmistakable possessiveness. As they moved together in perfect harmony, Vivian was conscious of the stares and whispers around them, but found she no longer cared what anyone thought. For the first time in decades, she felt fully alive, fully present in her own life rather than observing it from a safe distance. People will talk, she murmured, though without real concern. Let them, Andrew replied, his hand warm against her back as he guided her through a turn. What they say matters far less than what we know to be true. And what was true, Vivian realized as they danced beneath the crystal chandeliers, was that at 40 years of age she had unexpectedly found herself at the beginning of a new chapter, rather than the quiet conclusion she had resigned herself to. Whatever came next, be it joy or heartbreak, she would face it with the courage Andrew had recognized in her from the start. The music swelled around them, and for that perfect moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them, moving in harmony amid the swirling colors and candlelight, their faces reflecting the same dawning recognition that sometimes the most unexpected paths lead to the most extraordinary destinations. The weeks following the Harrington Ball transformed Vivian's once quiet life into a whirlwind of activity. Andrew called at Ashford nearly every day, sometimes to ride through the countryside, other times to walk in the gardens, or simply sit in conversation. Each encounter deepened their connection, revealing new facets of compatibility that surprised even Vivian herself. Society's reaction to their courtship, for it could no longer be called anything else, ranged from scandalized whispers to reluctant admiration. Lady Harrington and her circle maintained that the Duke was merely amusing himself before making a proper match, while others speculated that Vivian possessed some mysterious hold over him, perhaps even resorting to unsavory methods to secure his attention. Apparently I've employed gypsy love potions to ensnare you, Vivian informed Andrew dryly one afternoon as they sat in Ashford's conservatory. At least according to Mrs. Fairchild, who confided as much to Lady Pembroke at yesterday's garden party. Andrew's laugh was rich and genuine, a sound that had become increasingly frequent in their time together. How resourceful of you. And here I thought it was your intelligence, beauty, and remarkable fortitude that had captured my interest. Much less exciting than mysterious potions, she agreed with a smile. James, initially wary of the Duke's intentions, had gradually shifted to cautious approval as he witnessed the genuine affection between them. Elizabeth was less reserved in her enthusiasm, writing weekly from London with suggestions for trousseau items and potential wedding dates. Correspondence that Vivian read with a mixture of amusement and trepidation. For despite the deepening of their relationship, Vivian still harbored doubts, not about Andrew's sincerity, which had been proven beyond question, but about the wisdom of a duchess who would be subject to ridicule for her age, a wife who might never provide the heir a dukedom required. These concerns remained largely unspoken between them until a particularly fine September day when Andrew invited her to picnic at Oakwell Court. Chaperoned by Sarah, they rode out in his carriage, the countryside resplendent in early autumn colours. The transformation of Oakwell had continued apace, the grounds now showcasing formal gardens, productive orchards, and meticulous landscaping. Tenant cottages had been repaired, fields were heavy with harvest, and a sense of prosperity had returned to what had been a neglected property. "You've created something remarkable here," Vivian observed as they walked through the apple orchard, Sarah following at a discreet distance. "In such a short time." "I had a vision of what it could become," Andrew replied, offering her his arm as they navigated a slight incline. "Just as I have a vision for our future." Vivian felt her heart quicken at his words. Though their courtship had progressed with steady purpose, neither had spoken explicitly of marriage since that night on Harrington's terrace. "Andrew," she began hesitantly, "there are practical matters we must consider. Things that cannot be dismissed with romantic declarations, however sincere." He led her to a stone bench overlooking the valley below, gesturing for her to sit. "I'm listening." Gathering her courage, Vivian voiced the concerns that had troubled her sleep for weeks. "I am 40 years old. The likelihood of my bearing children, particularly the heir your position requires, is greatly diminished. Society will question your judgment in choosing a wife past her prime. Some will ridicule you for it. Others will speculate about your reasons, assuming the worst of both of us." "Are you finished?" he inquired when she paused for breath. "No," she admitted. "I also fear that your initial attraction may be based on novelty, the refreshing experience of a woman who treats you as a man rather than a title. In time, that novelty will fade, and you may regret binding yourself to someone so unconventional." Andrew listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful. When she finally fell silent, he took her hands in his touch warm and reassuring. "May I address each concern in turn?" At her nod, he continued, "Regarding children, I have never based my worth as a man on the continuation of a bloodline. The dukedom has a clear line of succession through my cousin's son, should I not produce an heir. Would I welcome children with you? Absolutely. Do I consider them a requirement for our happiness? I do not." He shifted slightly to face her more directly. "As for society's opinion, when have you ever known me to base my decisions on such flimsy foundations? Let them talk. Their approval is irrelevant to me." "And the novelty," Vivian pressed, needing reassurance on this most personal fear. "Vivian," he said, her name a caress on his lips, "what I feel for you is not fascination with the unusual or appreciation for a novel experience. It is recognition, soul recognizing soul, mind meeting mind as equal. Such a connection does not fade with time, it deepens." He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I had planned a more romantic setting for this, but perhaps plain speaking in the sunshine suits us better than grand gestures by moonlight." Opening the box, he revealed a ring unlike any Vivian had ever seen, not the traditional diamond solitaire, but an exquisite sapphire surrounded by small diamonds in an intricate gold setting. "This belonged to my grandmother," Andrew explained, "a woman of remarkable intelligence and courage, much like yourself. She told me once to give it only to a woman worthy of partnership, not merely adornment." He held the ring between them. "I can imagine no one more worthy than you, Vivian Campbell. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Vivian looked from the ring to his face, seeing there an openness and vulnerability he showed to no one else. In that moment, the last of her doubts dissolved, replaced by a certainty that felt like coming home after a long journey. "Yes," she said simply, "I will." The joy that transformed his features was answer enough to any lingering fears. He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit as if destined, and raised her hand to his lips. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for your trust, for your courage, for accepting me as I am, not as the world perceives me." "The same might be said in return," Vivian replied, blinking away unexpected tears. "You saw me when I had become accustomed to invisibility." In a gesture that startled her with its spontaneity, Andrew cupped her face gently between his hands. "May I?" he asked, his voice low and uncertain for perhaps the first time since she had known him. At her nod, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that began with tender restraint, but quickly deepened into something that stole her breath and set her heart racing. Decades of loneliness and resignation melted away in the warmth of his embrace, replaced by a joy so intense it bordered on pain. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Andrew rested his forehead against hers. "I've waited a lifetime to find you," he murmured, "and I intend to spend the rest of my days ensuring you never regret accepting me." "I already don't," she assured him, her smile radiant with newfound happiness. The announcement of their engagement sent ripples through society far beyond Derbyshire. London papers carried the news of the Duke's unconventional choice, while drawing rooms buzzed with speculation and thinly veiled criticism. Lady Caroline's father publicly declared himself shocked by the Duke's lapse in judgment, while her mother was heard lamenting the tragedy of a great house without proper succession. Vivian faced the gossip with the quiet dignity that characterized her, neither hiding from society's judgment nor allowing it to dim her happiness. Andrew, for his part, responded to one particularly pointed comment from Lord Harrington with a look so frigid that the man was rumoured to have left the county club early with complaints of sudden illness. James proved an unexpected ally, vigorously defending his sister's honour and suitability when whispers reached his ears. "My sister," he announced loudly at a dinner where several detractors were present, "brings to this marriage not only the Campbell lineage, which predates half your titles, but qualities of character that make her worth 10 debutantes. Blackmore is the fortunate party in this match, not the reverse." Elizabeth, delighted beyond measure by the engagement, took charge of wedding preparations with characteristic enthusiasm. "A Christmas wedding," she declared, overriding Vivian's preference for a quiet ceremony. "At St. George's in London. Half the ton will be in town for the season. Let them see what true love looks like." "I had hoped for something simpler," Vivian protested, overwhelmed by her sister's grand plans. "Perhaps the village church here at Ashford." "Nonsense," Elizabeth dismissed. "You are marrying a duke, Vivian. Certain traditions must be observed, if only to silence the critics." Andrew, consulted on the matter, sided unexpectedly with Elizabeth. "Let us begin as we mean to continue," he suggested to Vivian during a quiet moment at Ashford, "with confidence in our choice and without apology for its unconventionality." And so preparations began for a December wedding that would, as Elizabeth predicted, draw the attention of the highest circles of society. Dressmakers were summoned from London, invitations engraved and dispatched, and arrangements made for the ceremony and subsequent celebration at Blackmore House in Mayfair. Through it all, Vivian found herself transformed, not only by the external circumstances of her life, but by the internal certainty that had replaced decades of resignation. The woman who had accepted spinsterhood as her destiny now found herself planning a future with a man whose love had awakened parts of her she had thought long dormant. October brought the traditional harvest celebrations at both Ashford and Oakwell, with tenants and servants gathering for feasting and dancing in barns decorated with autumn bounty. At Andrew's insistence, the couple attended both, presenting themselves as future lord and lady to those whose livelihoods depended on the estates. "They already adore you," Andrew observed as they watched the celebrations at Oakwell, "far more readily than London society." They judge based on actions, not assumptions, Vivian replied, watching a group of children playing with the wooden toys Andrew had commissioned from a local craftsman as harvest gifts. A more reliable measure, I found. November brought a flurry of preparations as the wedding date approached. Vivian travelled to London with Elizabeth to oversee the completion of her trousseau and wedding dress, a creation of ivory silk and delicate lace that managed to be both elegant and flattering to her mature beauty. "You look radiant," Elizabeth declared, as Vivian stood for a final fitting in the dressmaker's salon. "Every inch a duchess." Vivian studied her reflection with wonder, scarcely recognizing the confident woman who gazed back at her. "I feel transformed," she admitted. "Love does that," Elizabeth replied with uncharacteristic wisdom. "It reveals the person you were always meant to be." As December arrived with a dusting of snow across the countryside, one final challenge presented itself in the form of Lady Caroline Rutherford. The young woman called at Blackmore House in London, while Vivian was reviewing arrangements for the wedding breakfast, arriving unannounced and clearly determined to have her say. "Lady Vivian," she curtsied with practiced grace, though her eyes held nothing but cold disdain. "I felt I must speak with you before this unfortunate situation progresses further." "Lady Caroline," Vivian acknowledged, maintaining her composure despite the unexpected confrontation. "What situation do you refer to?" "This absurd engagement?" Caroline replied, dropping all pretense of politeness. "Surely you realize the Duke cannot truly wish to marry a woman of your advanced years. He is being manipulated, whether by you or by some misguided sense of honor, into a match that will bring him nothing but regret and ridicule." Rather than anger, Vivian felt an unexpected surge of pity for the young woman whose self-worth seemed entirely bound to the acquisition of a title. "Your concern is noted, Lady Caroline. However, I think the Duke is quite capable of making his own decisions." "He is being blinded by some temporary infatuation," Caroline insisted, her composure slipping further. "Everyone knows a man of his position requires a young wife who can provide heirs and enhance his social standing. What can you possibly offer him that would compensate for the embarrassment of such a mismatch?" Before Vivian could respond, a deep voice answered from the doorway. "Understanding, intelligence, compassion, strength of character." "Shall I continue? Or is that sufficient answer to your inappropriate question, Lady Caroline?" Andrew stood in the entrance, his expression thunderous as he regarded the unwelcome visitor. Caroline paled visibly, but maintained her ground. "Your Grace," she curtsied, "I was merely expressing concern for your future happiness." "A concern that is neither solicited nor welcome," Andrew replied coldly. "My happiness is assured by my choice of bride, and I would thank you to never again question either her suitability or my judgment." Caroline's lips tightened into a thin line. "You will regret this decision," she predicted, gathering her dignity around her like a cloak. "When society turns its back on your unsuitable duchess, when your house remains without an heir, when the initial novelty wears thin. The only thing I regret," Andrew stated with quiet intensity, "is that someone of your youth has already become so bitter and calculating. It speaks poorly of your upbringing and bodes ill for your future contentment." With a final glare at Vivian, Caroline swept from the room, her departure marked by the sharp click of the front door. "I apologize for that unpleasantness," Andrew said, crossing to take Vivian's hands in his. "Are you all right?" "Perfectly," Vivian assured him, surprised to find it was true, "though I fear Lady Caroline's sentiment is shared by many in society." "Their opinion matters not at all," Andrew replied firmly, "only yours." "And mine is that I am the most fortunate woman in England," Vivian said, her smile banishing the last shadows of Caroline's visit. "To have found love when I had long since ceased to hope for it." The day of the wedding dawned clear and cold, December sunshine glinting off snow-dusted London streets. St. George's Church on Hanover Square was filled with a curious mixture of guests, the cream of society, attending partly from obligation and partly from curiosity, alongside beloved friends and family genuinely delighted by the match. In a private room of the church, Elizabeth made final adjustments to Vivian's wedding ensemble. The exquisite ivory gown complemented by the Campbell family diamonds and a delicate veil anchored by a coronet of orange blossoms. Something old, Elizabeth recited, touching the diamond earrings that had belonged to their mother. Something new, she continued, adjusting the ivory kid gloves purchased for the occasion. Something borrowed, she added, clasping a bracelet of pearls from her own collection around Vivian's wrist. And something blue. From a small box, she withdrew a delicate blue silk handkerchief embroidered with Vivian's new initials, VF, in silver thread. To tuck into your sleeve, she explained, her eyes suspiciously bright. For luck and happiness. Thank you, Lizzie, Vivian said, embracing her sister with careful consideration for their finery. For everything. Be happy, Elizabeth whispered fiercely. You deserve it more than anyone I know. The traditional wedding march announced their entrance into the church. With James at her side, Vivian walked down the aisle toward Andrew, who stood tall and commanding at the altar. His expression as he turned to watch her approach, one of undisguised admiration and love, banished any lingering doubts she might have harbored. The ceremony proceeded with traditional solemnity, their voices clear and confident as they exchanged vows. When Andrew slipped the gold band alongside her sapphire engagement ring, Vivian felt the weight of its significance, not as a symbol of possession but as a token of partnership and mutual choice. I present to you, the vicar announced to the assembled guests, His Grace the Duke of Blackmore and Her Grace the Duchess of Blackmore. As they processed back down the aisle, now husband and wife, Vivian observed the varied expressions of the guests, some genuinely pleased, others barely concealing their disapproval, many simply curious to witness the culmination of the season's most unexpected match. Ignore them, Andrew murmured, his hand warm and reassuring over hers on his arm. This day belongs to us alone. The wedding breakfast at Blackmore House was a splendid affair, with London's finest caterers providing a feast worthy of the occasion. The Duke's ancestral home, typically austere in its grandeur, had been transformed with winter flowers, evergreen boughs, and hundreds of candles creating an atmosphere of warmth and celebration. As tradition dictated, speeches were made, James offering a heartfelt tribute to his sister's character and worth, Andrew surprising many with an uncharacteristically emotional acknowledgement of the happiness he had found with his new bride. To those who questioned this match, he concluded, raising his glass toward Vivian, I can only say that true value is often found where least expected, and that conventional wisdom pales beside the evidence of the heart. To my Duchess, my partner, my equal, my joy. The guests raised their glasses in response, society's strictures requiring at least the appearance of support, whatever their private reservations might be. As the celebration continued around them, Andrew drew Vivian into a quiet alcove overlooking the snow-covered garden behind the house. Are you happy, my love? He asked, searching her face with tender concern. Beyond measure, she replied truthfully, though I confess to some fatigue from maintaining a duchess-like demeanor before all those critical eyes. He laughed, the sound warming her more effectively than the fire blazing in the nearby hearth. Then perhaps we might make an early escape to Blackmore Court. I've had the master suite prepared for our arrival, and the staff has strict instructions not to disturb us until summoned. The hint of desire in his voice sent a pleasant shiver through Vivian's body. A tempting suggestion, she agreed, though Elizabeth might never forgive us for abandoning our own celebration. Elizabeth will understand, Andrew assured her, brushing a tendril of hair from her cheek with gentle fingers. Besides, I've waited long enough to have you truly to myself. Within the hour, with minimal fanfare but Elizabeth's conspiratorial assistance, they departed for Blackmore Court, the Duke's primary country estate, some hours from London. The journey passed in comfortable conversation and moments of companionable silence, their hands often linked as the carriage rolled through the winter landscape. Night had fallen by the time they reached the imposing gates of Blackmore Court, the house itself a magnificent silhouette against the star-filled sky. Unlike Oakwell's more modest proportions, this was a grand estate befitting a dukedom, hundreds of windows glowing with welcoming light, an army of servants lined up to greet their master and new mistress. Welcome home, Your Grace, Andrew said softly as he handed her down from the carriage. Thank you, Your Grace, she replied, a hint of mischief in her smile despite her nerves. Later, after they had dined privately in their suite and completed the rituals of preparation with the help of their respective servants, Vivian stood before the fire in her new nightgown and robe, exquisite garments of silk and lace that had formed part of her trousseau. Andrew entered from his dressing room, clad in a burgundy dressing gown, his expression softening as he beheld her. "You are beautiful," he said simply, crossing to take her hands in his. "And I am the most fortunate of men." "I was thinking much the same about my own good fortune," Vivian admitted, her voice steady despite the flutter of anticipation in her stomach. At 40, she came to her marriage bed, with the confidence of maturity, but the vulnerability of one who had never known physical love. Understanding her unspoken thoughts, Andrew raised her hands to his lips. "We have all the time in the world," he assured her, "tonight and all the nights to come." Their first kiss as husband and wife was tender, a gentle exploration rather than the passionate claiming she had half expected. With infinite patience, Andrew guided her toward the canopied bed, each touch and caress designed to reassure and awaken rather than overwhelm. "I love you," he murmured against her skin, "every part of you." "And I love you," she whispered in return, surrendering to the joy of their union, "with all that I am." In the quiet hours of that winter night, Vivian discovered that love between equals, built on mutual respect and genuine understanding, transcended the physical act to touch something deeper, more profound than she had ever imagined possible. What society might have dismissed as unsuitable or inappropriate revealed itself to be a perfect matching of hearts and minds, bodies and souls. Spring found them primarily at Blackmore Court, where Vivian had taken to her new role with natural grace and authority. The servants, initially uncertain about their master's unconventional choice, quickly came to appreciate her intelligence and considerate management. Tenants found in her an advocate for improved conditions and educational opportunities, while neighboring landowners discovered a formidable negotiator beneath her gracious exterior. London society, predictably, remained divided in its acceptance. Some, recognizing the genuine happiness of the match, revised their initial judgment and welcomed the new Duchess into their circles. Others maintained a cool distance, particularly those like Lady Caroline and her mother, who had envisioned a different outcome to the Duke's matrimonial prospects. "Does it trouble you?" Andrew inquired one evening, as they relaxed in the library after returning from a particularly frosty reception at Lady Pembroke's London home. "The continued resistance in some quarters?" "Less than I expected," Vivian admitted, secure in the contentment they had found together. "Their approval seems a small matter compared to what we've built." "And what is that exactly?" he asked, his eyes warm with affection as he regarded her across the chessboard where their nightly game was in progress. "Partnership," she replied without hesitation. "Understanding. A home where both of us can be fully ourselves, without pretense or performance." She moved her queen across the board. "Checkmate, I believe." Andrew studied the board with surprise before chuckling in acknowledgement of his defeat. "You've been practicing." "I have an excellent teacher," she countered with a smile, "one who never underestimates his opponent." Rising from his chair, Andrew came to kneel beside hers, taking her hands in his. "I have news," he said, his expression unusually hesitant. "News that may change our plans somewhat." "What is it?" Vivian asked, suddenly concerned by his serious demeanor. "Dr. Wilson confirmed it today," Andrew said, his voice dropping to a reverent whisper. "We are to have a child, Vivian. In late autumn, if his calculations are correct." Vivian stared at him in shock, one hand instinctively moving to her abdomen. She had noticed changes in her body, but had attributed them to the adjustment to married life, never daring to hope for what had seemed a biological impossibility. "Are you certain?" she whispered. "At my age?" "Quite certain," Andrew assured her, joy illuminating his features. "It seems miracles do occur, particularly when least expected." Tears filled Vivian's eyes, tears of joy and wonder, and overwhelming gratitude for this final unexpected blessing. "I never thought—" "Nor did I," Andrew admitted, gathering her into his arms. "But I find I am delighted beyond words. Another Campbell Fox to terrorize London society with unconventional choices." Vivian laughed through her tears, the sound mingling with his deeper chuckle in perfect harmony. "I love you," she said, framing his face between her hands. "More than I ever believed possible." "And I you," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "From the moment I saw you." and for all the days to come. As spring blossomed into summer and summer faded into autumn, their joy only deepened. The announcement of the impending heir to the Blackmore dukedom silenced the last critical voices in society, though neither Vivian nor Andrew placed much value on this belated approval. On a crisp November morning, after a surprisingly easy labour that belied both Vivian's age and first-time motherhood, Lady Catherine Eleanor Fox made her entrance into the world, a robust infant with her father's dark hair and her mother's blue eyes, her healthy cries testifying to a strength of character that seemed fitting for the daughter of such a union. "She's perfect," Andrew whispered, cradling his daughter with careful wonder while seated beside Vivian's bed. "Absolutely perfect." "She is," Vivian agreed, exhausted but radiant with happiness, "though I suspect she'll prove as stubborn as both her parents combined." "A terrifying prospect," Andrew acknowledged, with a smile that had become frequent in their months together. "London society may never recover." "Let them adapt," Vivian said serenely, watching her husband and daughter with a heart so full it seemed impossible to contain such joy. "As we have." Later, as twilight settled over Blackmore Court and the new family rested in peaceful contentment, Vivian reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. From resigned spinsterhood to duchess, from solitary contentment to shared joy, from believing her life's chapter was concluding to discovering it had only just begun. "What are you thinking?" Andrew asked softly, seated beside her bed while Catherine slept in the cradle nearby. "That happiness often arrives in the most unexpected forms," Vivian replied, her fingers entwined with his, "and that I am profoundly grateful it found us." "As am I," he agreed, raising her hand to his lips. "My duchess, my love, my life." Outside, the first snowflakes of winter drifted past the windows, a gentle reminder of the cycle of seasons and the endless possibility of renewal. Within, the warm glow of candles illuminated a tableau of family, hard-won, unconventional, and perfect in its own unique way. Society might have declared Vivian too old to be a bride, but in finding love with the most unexpected of men, she had discovered that the heart recognizes no such limitations, and that true happiness often arrives in the most surprising forms at precisely the right time. The end. Dear listener, we sincerely hope that this story of Lady Vivian and the Duke of Blackmore has brought a moment of comfort and tranquility to your evening. In a world filled with endless responsibilities and the hurried pace of daily life, we believe that taking time to immerse yourself in a heartwarming tale can be a precious form of self-care. Too Old to Be a Bride reminds us all that love recognizes no boundaries of age or circumstance, that happiness can find us in unexpected moments, even when we've resigned ourselves to a different path. Just as Vivian discovered that her life story wasn't ending, but beginning anew, perhaps there are chapters in your own journey waiting to unfold in beautiful and surprising ways. Our team remains committed to bringing you stories that warm your soul and comfort your heart after the demands of your day. We carefully craft each narrative to be a gentle haven, a place where you can set aside worries and responsibilities, if only for a little while. It is our deepest hope that tonight's story has contributed to a relaxing and restorative evening for you. May you carry a piece of this tale's warmth into your dreams and into tomorrow. Until we meet again for another story, remember that like Lady Vivian, you are never too old or too anything to embrace joy, to welcome love, and to begin again. With heartfelt gratitude for your company on this journey, your dedicated storytelling team, Legends of the Fall. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We hope that Lady Vivian and the Duke of Blackmore's story brought you comfort, joy, and maybe even a tear or two. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share this story with someone who needs to believe that love is still possible, at any stage of life. Your support is what keeps us going and inspires us to create more heartfelt stories full of love, healing, and unexpected redemption. At the end of this video, you'll see a suggestion for another emotional story from our channel. Click it, and let yourself be surprised again by love, courage, and timeless romance. With deepest gratitude, your Legends of the Fall team.